I want you to think about the last time you went grocery shopping. Not a big haul, just a regular Tuesday. Picked up some tomatoes, grabbed some beef, maybe a bag of coffee. And somewhere between the produce section and the checkout line, you stopped, did the math in your head, put something back. Maybe you told yourself prices are just high right now. Maybe you blamed it on the pandemic hangover. Maybe you didn't think about it at all. You just quietly started buying the cheaper brand. Here's the thing though. What's happening to your grocery bill right now is not random. It's not just inflation. There are 3 separate crises happening at the same time in 3 completely different parts of the world. And every single one of them ends up in your shopping cart. A war in the Middle East, the worst drought America has seen in over 100 years. And a political decision made in Washington that most people never even heard about. 3 things, all colliding, right now. And nobody's really explaining how they connect. So let's do that. Part 1. The number that should stop you cold. Tomatoes are up 40%. Just sit with that for a second. Not tomato products, not ketchup, not pasta sauce. We're talking about the actual tomato, the thing that goes in your salad, the BLT ingredient, the thing that costs maybe $1.50 and you just throw in the cart without thinking. Up 40% compared to last year. And if that sounds like a lot, it is. But the weird thing is, tomatoes are actually the most explainable item on this list. Because the tomato story is basically the story of everything right now, just in one vegetable. So let's start there. Part 2. The tomato is not actually about tomatoes. Here's something most Americans don't know. The United States imports about 70% of its fresh tomatoes. 70%. And of that 70%, roughly 90% comes from one place. Mexico. So when you pick up a tomato at the store, odds are extremely high it was grown in the Sinaloa region of Mexico, picked by hand, loaded onto a refrigerated truck, driven across the border, and shipped to wherever you live. That whole process used to work fine. There was actually a trade agreement called the Tomato Suspension Agreement that let Mexican tomatoes come into the U.S. without any import taxes. It had been in place for years. Farmers on both sides understood it. Supply chains were built around it. Last July, the Trump administration tore it up. The White House said Mexican tomatoes were being sold unfairly cheap, undercutting American farmers. So they slapped a 17% tariff on fresh Mexican tomatoes. Now, agriculture economists basically all said the same thing at the time. They warned that this would raise prices, that there weren't enough domestic tomatoes to make up the difference, that it would take 6 to 9 months before consumers felt it. Nobody really listened. 6 months later, tomato prices are at an 8-year high. And here's the part that makes it worse. Florida is America's largest domestic tomato supplier. If Mexico's prices go up, Florida is theoretically the backup. Except, this past winter, Florida got hit by multiple freezes. 66 out of 67 counties in the state saw freezing temperatures between December and January. The damage to Florida's tomato crop alone was over $3 billion. Strawberries, citrus, watermelons, squash, all of it. So the imported supply got hit by a tariff. The domestic backup got wiped out by weather. And on top of that, diesel prices surged 40% in March alone because of the war in Iran. Tomatoes travel in refrigerated trucks. Refrigerated trucks run on diesel. So you've got fewer tomatoes, taxed at the border, trucked across the country at record fuel costs. That's why your tomato is $2.26 a pound, the highest it's been since 2018. One vegetable, 3 separate hits at the same time. Part 3. The war your gas pump already knows about. Let's talk about Iran for a second, because most of the conversation around this war has been political. Should we be there? Shouldn't we? What does it mean geopolitically? But here's what it means to your grocery store. When the US and Iran went to war in February, Iran did something that sounds almost abstract on the news. They closed, or effectively threatened to close, the Strait of Hormuz. If you've never heard of the Strait of Hormuz, picture a narrow strip of water, about 21 miles wide at its tightest point, sits between Iran and the Arabian Peninsula. Here's why that matters. Roughly 20% of the world's entire oil supply passes through that strait every single day. It's not a metaphor. It's one of the most physically consequential bodies of water on the planet. When Iran disrupted shipping there, global energy markets freaked out, because they should. Gasoline in the US is now up 28% year over year. Diesel, the fuel that moves basically every physical product in America, was up 40% in March alone. Now, here's what people miss about food prices and energy costs. It's not just that you pay more at the pump, it's that everything you eat was transported by a truck or a ship or a refrigerated container, all of which run on fuel. Fertilizer, the stuff that grows the crops in the first place, is largely made from natural gas. Energy prices go up, fertilizer costs go up. Then there's the farms themselves. Irrigation pumps run on electricity and diesel. Greenhouses need heating. Harvest equipment burns fuel. So the moment oil prices surge, food prices follow. Not immediately. It takes a few months, but it follows. Economists call this pass-through. Businesses absorb the hit for a while. Try not to raise prices. Try to hold customers. But there's a limit. And when that limit is reached, everything moves at once. That's what's happening right now in April and May 2026. The pass-through is hitting. Coffee up 18.5%. Seafood up 6.2%. Beef up 12% year over year. Clothing up 4.2%. The war in Iran isn't just a foreign policy story, it's in your cart. Part 4. The drought. Nobody is talking about. Okay, this is the one that genuinely surprised me when I went deep on it. We're in the middle of one of the worst droughts America has ever recorded. As of right now, today, May 2026, over 61% of the continental United States is in moderate to exceptional drought conditions. 61%. To put that in perspective, the last time drought covered this much of the country was 2012, and the Palmer Drought Severity Index, which is basically the most comprehensive measure we have, hit its highest reading for March since records began in 1895. The Southeast is the worst hit. Georgia, North Carolina, South Carolina. They've experienced record dry conditions that stretch back to September of last year. Records going back 131 years. Broken. In Georgia, the governor declared a state of emergency in 91 counties. Wildfires burned across the state for months. There was actually a stretch recently where the Georgia Forestry Commission reported 0 new wildfires in a day. And that was considered news because it hadn't happened since December. Nebraska, Colorado, Utah, Oregon. 2/3 of the American West is parched. Now here's where this connects to your grocery bill. Drought doesn't just kill crops, it does something slower and more damaging. When farmers can't grow feed for their livestock, they can't afford to keep the animals, so they sell them. They liquidate. That's been happening with cattle since 2022. The U.S. cattle herd right now sits at 86.2 million head. Sounds like a lot. It's actually the lowest it's been since 1951, the 1950s. The herd has been shrinking for 8 straight years, down from a peak of 132 million head back in 1975. Since 2019 alone, 8 million cattle gone. When a rancher in Missouri or Texas sells off half his breeding stock to survive a drought, those aren't cows that are going to show up in the supply chain next year. A cow takes about 30 months from birth to beef. You can't just flick a switch and grow more. So, beef prices are up 12% year over year right now, and they're not coming down soon. Industry estimates say the herd won't meaningfully start rebuilding until at least 2027, maybe 2028. One rancher from a Texas livestock auction put it bluntly. We're making the cattle we do have bigger than we've ever made them in our lives, but the pounds can't overcome the total numbers we're short. That's not an abstract quote. That's someone telling you why your ground beef is almost $9 a pound. And then you add drought on top of drought. Brazil and Vietnam are the world's 2 largest coffee producers. Both have faced years of extreme weather and poor harvests. Coffee prices globally had already surged 55% between 2022 and mid-2025. Then, tariffs hit. Most of the coffee Americans drink is imported, primarily from Brazil, which until recently faced a 50% tariff. Coffee is now up nearly 20% year over year. Part 5. The math that hits hardest. Here's the thing about all of this that nobody wants to say directly. These price increases don't hit everyone equally. A $2,500 annual tariff burden, which is roughly what economists estimate the average American household is absorbing right now just from trade policy alone, hits a family making $60,000 a year completely differently than one making $200,000. Lower and middle-income families spend a much bigger share of their budget on physical goods, food, clothing, household basics. These are exactly the categories getting hammered. Higher-income households spend proportionally more on services, restaurants, travel, experiences. Tariffs don't touch those the same way. The drought hits hardest on fixed incomes, in rural communities, in places where grocery stores are already limited. And then there's this. A CNBC poll from April found that more than half of Americans say everyday life has become less affordable over the past year. 3/4 of them, 76%, pointed specifically to grocery prices as the reason. Not gas, not housing, not healthcare. Groceries. So when does it stop? Honestly, not fast. The tariff could get reversed. The war could end tomorrow. But supply chains don't snap back overnight. The cattle herd won't recover until 2028 at the earliest. And a drought that broke records going back to 1895 doesn't disappear after one good rainstorm. The price pain is already baked in. Here's what I want you to take from this. Next time you're standing in that checkout line and you put something back, that's not on you. That's a war 7,000 miles away. A drought drying out 2/3 of the country, and a trade decision made in Washington that most people never even heard about. All of it landing in your cart at the same time. None of it simple. None of it going away fast. That's your grocery bill right now.